This week on Quadriga, free press or free to repress, media under threat. In the past 12 months, many journalists, bloggers, and writers have risked their lives to get their stories out. And none more so than in the Arab world. It was hoped that the Arab Spring would unleash a new era of media freedom there. But some countries have seen an increase in censorship. Fearing that its own people might also be inspired to revolt, China took steps to tighten its grip on cyberspace. Media freedom has also been suffering in Europe. An unfettered media is considered central to democracy. So, can the press fight back? Your host on today's show is Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Each year on May 3rd, the United Nations celebrates World Press Freedom Day, where it commemorates the principles of press freedom. And today we want to examine with my three guests if press freedom is really on the rise or not really in decline on a global scale. All my three guests have extensive knowledge and experience in that field. For instance, Christian Mier is a journalist and executive director for the German section of Reporters Without Borders, the largest press freedom organization in the world. Isaac Mao is one of China's best-known bloggers and the organizer of Chinese Bloggers Conference. And Hani Yusuf is a Pakistani journalist who works out of both Berlin and Karachi. Thank you all for being here. Well, World Press Freedom Day, indeed an important day. Christian Mier, your organization, Reporters Without Borders, has nearly for 30 years has been trying to protect and defend journalists worldwide. Would you say that 2011 was a bad year for press freedom?
Well, I think that's how you view it. Taking just the numbers, last year was a very bad year. So numbers of killed journalists, the numbers of threatened journalists, and the number of arrested journalists nearly have doubled in all those three numbers. But somehow this is reflected by some positive development, like the struggle in the Arab world for freedom, for press freedom. So I don't want to relativize the other things, but I think so you have to see both sides of the coin. Yeah.
So you wouldn't say on a general scale that press freedom is in decline then?
I would not say this, but I think it's always coming and going and a permanent struggle. And I think the most important thing that we always have to struggle for the demand for democracy and for press freedom. So I would not say in a very general manner like that, no.
And we will see in more detail as to what countries and areas in particular are most affected. Isaac Mao, you are one of China's best-known bloggers. As a matter of fact, many people argue that you are China's first blogger ever. And as such, you have extensive experience in the field of press freedom. Would you say that if you look at the course of time that your job has gotten easier or worse? Has it gotten more difficult?
I think in China, it's a long term of repression on media. And they are adding more bad record, time by time after internet rising up. From since 10 years ago, when people got the chance to reach blogs, and the professional journalism, first time touch base with the amateur journalism, by using weblogs, Web 2.0 tools. So the government, they are trying to see, how they use the traditional repression way to apply to the internet space. And adding this kind of complexity, so you see China is collectively, showing more and more cases, especially the recent, Chen Guangcheng case, the blind lawyer, who were in detention for 19 months, after his releasing from prison. And many local media, they just kept silent, report nothing. And those international media and the the grassroots media, have to, participate in this kind of reporting and discussing and free expressing, but the government try anyways, anywhere in very macro detail to censor all those kind of reportings and media from people. Majority of Chinese people viewing this kind of content. So in this case, Chen Guangcheng case, originally we think is a very good opportunity for China to take the political reform as a beginning, but it's going to complex as yesterday's development when Chen Guangcheng went out from U.S. embassy to go to hospital with the U.S. ambassador. And after that, all the commitment, supposedly between China and U.S. government seems going nowhere yesterday afternoon. So, but the local, if you see through the local media and the internet, it's quite a different world. In the local media, seems nothing happened, but the internet is in a very hard discussion, although there are many ways China government don't want people to see that. So it's going to complex in China. On the one hand, the government, definitely repressing more to the any kind of media, including the mainstream media they control. At the same time, internet become an alternative, way to give people the chance to discuss the future. So there's also crises and opportunities to us.
I see. So a very mixed bag, complex picture. Hani Yusuf, you are a journalist, of course, and you have conducted journalism in fields as different as New York City, Karachi, and Berlin. How would you say if is journalism being observed and exercised in these areas as different as the U.S., Pakistan, and, for instance, Germany and Western Europe?
I think there's compromises on press freedom in all parts, just different ways. In Pakistan, it's obviously an entirely different ballgame. The CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, reported in the last 2 years we were the most dangerous country for journalism. And this has to do with more than just the fact that the government and the military and its notorious spy wing wants to suppress a lot of information, but it also has to do with the fact that it has become a dangerous country. We suffer from bomb blasts, kidnappings, etc. So the danger to journalists are many. In New York, I was astounded by Helen Thomas being fired as the White House correspondent, someone of her stature. I don't know if that isn't a compromise on media freedom.
The long-time White House correspondent.
Right, a long-term White House correspondent and veteran journalist. And her sort of Arab background from some generations ago was sort of called into question, etc. And I felt that was a complete repression of the press freedom. In Berlin, I feel things are different. Why do we have to run interviews with politicians by the politicians' PR? Is that not a repression of media freedom? Is that not censorship?
Well, Christian Mier, Hani Yusuf is just saying that curtailment of press freedom comes in various shapes and forms. Is she correct when she says that all areas, geographically speaking, are, if you will, limiting press freedom all in their own different way?
Well, I would say there's a kind of north-south and west-east gap with some happy exceptions. So, for example, you mentioned Germany, and I think there is a so-called thread of the journalism and press freedom here is, of course, that much more the public relations intervening to journalism, and so journalists in Germany, for example, aren't facing the risk of being killed, and or they just have to take the risk, as in France, as in other Western countries, to lose their job if there are some problems, and so I would fully agree that it's a very complex matter, press freedom, and that there's in northern countries that our press freedom ranking, which Reporters Without Borders is publishing every year, is clearly reflecting this. So that in northern countries like Finland, Iceland, and even Estonia, as an eastern exception, very good regarding press freedom, and eastern countries in Europe, as Romania, Bulgaria, very bad. But what I really want to point out that it's always very easy to accuse the bad situation of press freedom. What I think what's really important to mention is always that there always has to be something like a demand for press freedom, and I think one of the biggest challenges is supporting journalistic culture which demands press freedom, and not only press freedom as one mean of democracy. And yeah.
So Isaac Mao, journalism comes in various shapes and forms. Certainly you are a prime example of that. You are China's best-known blogger, meaning the traditional media outlets, if you will, are only one source of information. But you have shown, the internet has shown, there are various alternatives to that. Are you grateful for the rise of digital media, of news media?
I think the freedom of expression and freedom of press, I mean, today has very different meaning than maybe 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, because not because of we are using new technologies, but that means that the world is changing as well, because many things is becoming more complex, more cross-border, even cross-continental. So I think the information need faster speed to be transferred, to be conducted. So in China, that's one of the good case, I think, in the very complex situation I just mentioned. One side is that the authoritarian, control on media is going deeper and more, seems weird and crazy. But another side is that the internet and tools, new ideas, new information, they try to find different way to get across all the time. So I think the traditional media, they have the responsibility, and I think they have the chance also to work and collaborate with the new media, new tools, and grassroots, groups, so they can collaborate together. Also, like the Chen Guangcheng case yesterday, in a traditional way, the press will celebrate Chen Guangcheng's, going out of embassy, to take hospital. Seems like a very happy ending. But the grassroots media, they just leaked out, oh, it's not the case, because the family members were threatened before he was going out. It seems like under a consensus of the two parties. So things getting worse, getting complex, after the grassroots leaking this information. And I think then other mass media and traditional media followed up, because many journalists in China, foreign journalists, they learned how to contact with the grassroots media. So they know something not so simple, and they followed up. So the morning reports and the afternoon reports totally different. And it's very, very good example of today's, real-time media.
Hanne Yusuf, virtually everyone with an internet access these days can be a reporter. Isn't that the case? At the end of the day, we talk about citizen journalism, which obviously has a lot of upsides. We've seen it during the Arab Spring. But do you as a journalist fear that since every internet user is a potential journalist, that there might be, as a result, a declining quality in news?
I think irresponsible and bad journalism is one of the worst things to have happened to the industry lately, and I think it's one of the things that compromises press freedom, and one of the things that the repressors of press have to hold against us journalists. Only 2 years ago, I think for the first time, the prestigious Cabot Awards awarded Yoani Sanchez, a blogger from Cuba who wasn't even allowed to get out of the country, to accept her award in New York City. So yes, of course, those voices need to be celebrated, but journalism needs to come with a degree of responsibility. There needs to be checks and balances in the form of media law, very strong media law that needs to develop over time and needs to evolve, and in the form of a very strong code of conduct that must be followed. Otherwise, media cannot be sort of holding any kind of accuracy or responsibility.
Christian Mier, how has the rise in digital media changed your job, changed the job of Reporters Without Borders?
Well, I think it changed to, on the one side, it changed that we don't just address classical so-called journalists as our target group, but bloggers as well, and that I can fully understand this from my own experience, having worked in Belarus and Russia and some other countries which have actually a difficult situation regarding press freedom, because the new media, blogs, all what is happening on the internet so fantastically. So it's open up a free space for classical journalism, but because I think I don't like, and that reporter doesn't make a difference between classical media and traditional media, but regarding the content. And on the internet, there are happening fantastic investigations. And so if on blogs is happening journalism investigation techniques, we try to protect them. And so we don't make a difference between blogs and journalism.
You've just mentioned who's topping the list in the rankings as far as upholding the principles of press freedom, namely mostly the Scandinavian countries, as I understood it, Finland, Sweden, and so on and so forth. Who are the worst offenders?
Well, the worst are North Korea, Eritrea, and Turkmenistan.
And how would you rank China in that regard?
Well, they're not the worst one, but very bad. They're not at the bottom, but close to the bottom.
It's getting worse.
Yeah.
So not at the bottom quite yet, but certainly the situation for journalists and bloggers are rather difficult in China. Many writers, journalists and bloggers are behind bars in China. And the situation, as Isaac Mao also seemed to refer to, is rather mixed and perhaps a rather complex one. Let's have a look.
Freedom of the press is generally taken for granted in democratic countries. But in China, there's an ongoing battle between truth and censorship. Fearing that the Arab Spring uprisings could spread to China, the government has stepped up its policing of the internet. Email traffic is scanned, and popular websites like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube are blocked. The repression doesn't stop in cyberspace. Anyone trying to speak out of line is firmly muzzled. No other country in the world has as many bloggers and writers sitting behind bars. Blogger and artist Ai Weiwei was one of them.
The Chinese government has reacted with brutal force and an unheard of way of oppressing this. And arresting Ai Weiwei is just only the tip of the iceberg.
He was later released. But will he and other cyber dissidents ever be able to tear down China's Great Firewall?
Well, Isaac Mao, we just saw the situation of China, and your friend Weiwei was also mentioned in that report. Now, you are rather famous in China. You are very well known. Is that something you embrace? In other words, is your prominence protecting you from increased security and scrutiny, or is that something that rather highlights you and puts you at risk?
I think we are always in fear of being, repressed by the government, by the authority since our young age. We have such kind of fear always in the heart. But the openness of content, openness of technology give us a chance, to connect to each other step by step. For the Ai Weiwei case, I think he didn't also imagine that so many young people on internet supporting him, after his detention, people voluntarily raising up over $1 million for him to try to pay back the charges from the government on so-called taxation issues. So it's a kind of accumulation power. Collectively, we see it's also encouraged that to each individuals. Before that, everyone will be isolated and easily to be, separated, to deal with by the authority. But now, I think whenever something happens, if you send out a tweet, it could be a very good helper, for you, to protect you, to let people pay attention to you. And these kind of things, I totally experienced for about 10 years. Whenever my weblog was blocked, one of my blog was blocked again, I will tell people, okay, this is a screenshot, something happened to my blog and whatever. So it's going to be, it's a kind of message that give people a chance. If you share, it's not something, to individual. it's not something get you worse. Instead, you can get more similar sentiment from other people, and they can support you. They can give you solutions. They can find some other alternative for you. So you feel very much, supportive from your surroundings.
But are you fearing for your security at times?
All the time, but for example, whenever I travel across the borders, you will be very, very, heartbreaking to think over and over. If I were stopped there, what should I do? Who should I call? It's a kind of the always thing you need to think about. But you can also try to adjust to this kind of situation, to try to plan in advance, and you can try to speak in different ways. For example, like in China, nobody actually would love to directly confront anyone or any authority with an individual, power, very little power. But instead, they use very creative ways. So we see on internet in China now, there are many creative cartoons, pictures, new sayings about to joke the political system, to the social issues, and people use these kind of ways to spread the memes instead of just confronting the regime. In this way, the regime is also, they're losing their power. If they didn't find the enemy directly, like Ai Weiwei, he's using many creative ways to do this, and after his releasing, I think he is working on more new art projects, to reflect his detentions, to reflect the problems in China, and he tried to take care of other people as well, because he got the same repression before. He knows everything about that.
Hana Yusuf, Isaac Mao just mentioned that he fears for his security at times. Now, as a Pakistani journalist who's also reporting out of Karachi at times, do you know that feeling?
I absolutely do. Every time something gets published, I have a sense of paranoia because I have family back home. And there's certain subjects that if you touch upon, you are going to definitely piss some important people off that might not want you in the world, or might want to give you a warning of some sorts.
So does that lead you to censor yourself in a certain way?
I think censoring myself isn't a solution, because I think certain things need to be spoken about, and I think if, for example, Balochistan, which is this highly separatist province of Pakistan, and the media there is completely suppressed. It's just, journalists die there every single day, and it's not even reported about. They do not come out in Committee to Protect Journalists statistics even. And if you speak about that, you are going to piss off some important people, but it needs to be done. I think it just needs to be done with greater responsibility and with an awareness of the risks between yourself as well as the editors and as well as the media outlets that publish your work. I think that is respect to your profession.
So, Christian Mier, if you hear Isaac Mao and Hana Yusuf talk about their work and the difficulties they encounter exercising that work, does it make you feel frustrated or rather embolden you to follow the path that Reporters Without Borders has set forth for nearly 30 years?
Well, I'm happy that both of my dear colleagues here are still struggling and fighting, so it's more or less, I would say, it's motivating for me that our work is important.
And what would you say still needs to be done on your end as the largest organization, press freedom organization in the world?
What I mentioned earlier, on a very general level, I think it's always very important to underline really the importance for a journalistic culture and for a political culture which demands press freedom. That's on a very, very general level. But so what Reporters Without Borders does, to put it in 3 words, is 3 things. We document every violation, or not every, but the violations which are reported to us. Document violations of press freedoms. We investigate violations of press freedoms, and we accuse it, and we help journalists and bloggers out of threats due, for example, with practical help on censorship, with practical help on asylum procedures, with just practical help on infrastructure for going on with their work. And I think that's an ongoing process that has to be done.
Would you say that we in Europe, we are privileged in a certain way as far as press freedom is concerned?
In a very general way, I would say yes, as we have still this journalistic culture, which I mentioned before, this political culture which demands press freedom, and I would say having this culture in mind, I think this obliges us to commit for press freedom in other regions. So yeah.
Well, Europe might be better off, at least compared to some areas in the world, but it's not all gold that glitters in Europe either. There are some deficiencies as far as press freedom are concerned in Europe as well. And let's take a look which ones those are.
According to the organization Reporters Without Borders, Europe is at the forefront of media freedom. But despite that endorsement, European countries have tumbled down its latest press freedom rankings. The United Kingdom has slipped after a phone hacking scandal brought down one of the country's top tabloids. And there were proposals to put restrictions on social media in the wake of the riots that swept the country last August. Italy's rating has also plummeted, but it was said to have turned a page with media mogul Silvio Berlusconi out of the picture. Hungary experienced the biggest slip. It introduced controversial new laws that critics say could be used to clamp down on the media. But it was Greece that finished bottom of the European pile, amid reports that police attacked journalists during anti-austerity protests. Is Europe in danger of losing its crown as the protector of the press?
Well, Khasemieh, not all picture perfect in Europe. Would you say, where's the trend going in Europe, up or down?
Again, I would repeat what I said earlier, that we have a kind of north-south gap, and I want to point out that Europe is not only the European Union, that I would say from my understanding of Europe, I have a broader understanding, and the worst countries in Europe regarding press freedom are Belarus and Azerbaijan. So this just to make clear. But I would say we have some really developments which are really difficult in Eastern Europe, and there I would say it's really, to some extent, it has gone down in the last years. This I would clearly say. And what I, in Western Europe, observe, and what we observe in another organization as well, is that there is probably what is going down is again this awareness for press freedom and for the qualities of press freedom. And I think that's really the threat for press freedom in Europe.
Well, there's certainly still room for improvement then in Europe. Isaac Mao, the Arab Spring, the uprisings in the Arab Spring, we just heard, are making Beijing and making the Chinese government rather nervous because they feel that the wave of
yeah, definitely. It's a kind of, so at least people call it Arab Spring is a kind of internet revolution, although there are many political, social, background behind it. But internet and the mobile phones and the digital technologies definitely played an important role to send out the word, what is happening there. And Al Jazeera also, they line up to use new media and to collect the new media streamlines, to their traditional media screens. I think it's very important and a very significant message back to China government and authority. Oh, we need to prevent from Chinese people, copying or maybe mimicking these similar actions. So that's why but they were over paranoid, like Abu Wei's case, He said nothing about Jasmine, Arab Spring, but the government tried to, accuse him of, mobilizing people, of using new media tools to try to subvert the regime, whatever. Yeah, so it's a kind of after 3 months, he was released, and nothing explained, nothing, apologized, so that they're still using the financial, issue and charges toward him. So it's a kind of I mean, it's very important. The international phenomenon is happening, and I think Europe and America, they all have the responsibility to keep their traditional standard and to apply to the world instead of trying to compromise to for example, like Arab countries, China, some Asian repressive regimes. It's not the case. Instead, you need to enforce this kind of standard. I mean, to try to talk to Chinese government, why this kind of media norms is important to a future of a country, and there's no any exceptions to one country or one region. That's very important. Yeah.
Hani Yusuf, you come from a country, Pakistan, that protesters rose up against the so-called Mohammed cartoons that were published back in a Danish newspaper a few years ago, and the newspaper then defended the publication of those cartoons on the basis of press freedom. Would you say that press freedom has, to play devil's advocate here, would you say that press freedom also should have its limits?
I think by that standard, Helen Thomas should also not have been fired. I think the double standard of the concept of press freedom really irritates me, and I think it is sort of a rather Western construct or concept of press freedom, which I think that needs to change. I think the standards need to be sort of equalized, and they all need to be sort of treated with relative equality. But yeah, I think it's more complex in general than that. There's certain ways in which I feel that there is more press freedom in Pakistan. I feel that there's certain topics that are very easily criticized in Pakistan, and there's certain kinds of opinion that I can express much freer in Pakistan than I can in the rest of the world. So I think it's definitely much more complex than that. But I think the double standard part is something that really, really upsets me.
Would you say, Christian Mier, even as the executive director of the German section of Reporters Without Borders, do you sometimes open up the newspaper or watch the news and say, well, maybe we've gone overboard here, some reporters might have crossed certain limits here, or would you say it's all fair game?
No, I wouldn't say this. Not at all, of course, even if we have still some high standards, but I see, when I'm opening up my eyes, is when I see PR content is intervening in the classical media and the classical journalists aren't aware of this, and there I'm really skeptical about this. And last year we had this, well, I don't know if I would like to call it a scandal, but of course we had this debate with our former president, Christian Wolff, who called a tabloid journalist on his phone, and I would say this wasn't fair. So what I want to say that me personally, dealing a lot with colleagues from southern countries, Latin America personally, and Eastern Europe, what I see at least that my conversation changed a bit. That I would say in the last 3-5 years, as normally they were telling me more what bad things are happening in their respective countries, and from time to time I feel like that I could tell them some bad stories from here as well. So to some extent we are, I wouldn't say, probably it's a bit polemic, but to some extent I think we are a bit equalized.
Are you worried about the commercial influence sometimes that is attached to journalism, big corporations buying up newspapers or television news networks?
Well, journalism is a business, and that's from the very beginning. But what I wonder, or what I fear, is that there's no awareness about where's the border between advertisement, PR, and content.
Isaac Mao, journalism is a business, says Christian Mier.
Yeah, in China, journalism business is so huge now, and under the fast development of China economy, and the commercial media actually including many entertainment content and many, for example, like financial informations, they're vastly, reported. However, the political issues and social issues is somewhat, less discussed or still be used by the propaganda department of Communist Party. They control all the information related to these kind of issues and try to unify them, use the same cover page, use the same, words, that should be issued by the Xinhua News Agency, all the time related to these kind of issues. So I think the commercial in China, it's a kind of saying before that the commercialization and market economy could lead China to change. But the government, they deliberately, they adapt to this as well. And they learn how to, for example, a very famous Chinese, I won't mention the name, a business a newspaper. They have very half of very free market reporting, economy, stock market. But the first several pages, all the content came from the propaganda department. So it's the case in China. They are trying to apply the free market economy, the same time tightening up the traditional political repression on the media. So this is kind of struggling. Also a challenge to the whole world. For example, like many times, like U.S. or Europe, they have some bad practices. Like the UK government try to said that we try to shut down social media website in some maybe emergency cases, and China government will borrow it quickly, to say, see, the Europe has the similar things, not the China government doing this. So as some other bills introduced in Europe or U.S., China will follow up very quickly, to try to give them the legitimate, explanations of their censorship. So that's the bad practice I don't want to see more from other world.
And Hani Yusuf, what could the average citizen do to advance, if you will, press freedom? Because at the end of the day, it's pioneers such as Isaac Mao and courageous journalists such as yourself who are advancing the course of press freedom. But what can the average citizen do who's not a journalist to make sure that press freedom is being upheld?
I think the average citizen can keep himself informed or herself informed as well as they can by trying to reach out or trying to sort of read various kinds of media. Unfortunately, as we talked about, the sort of commercial side of journalism is also a problem we're dealing with. Our favorite man these days, Murdoch, and our own Axel Springer, Verlag here in Germany, and of course we have sort of examples of that all over the world. That is sort of pushing a certain kind of agenda, and because of that, the average citizen, the average sort of news consumer needs to keep himself as sort of informed as possible.
And would you say that, because you mentioned the case of Rupert Murdoch, who's obviously being scrutinized right now, the case is being scrutinized, a high-profile case in the UK, would you say that those cases sort of tarnish the reputation of your profession?
I think those are very essential cases. I think last year was a fabulous year for journalists because we were brought to task. I think journalists need to be brought to task. And whether they are citizen journalists, whether they are bloggers, whether they are opinion writers, they need to be accountable for what they write. And I think that is something that we need to do as media professionals. We need to be very, very responsible about what we give out to that average news consumer.
Responsibility, a big item, a big issue for journalists. Christian Mier, how do you as an organization are trying to instill those ethical values, if you will, into journalists?
Well, I would say, as we are documenting the violations of press freedoms, we really hope, all over the world, we really hope to raise the awareness for the good things of quality journalism and for the really the possibilities we do have here as a Western-based organizations. So I would say this.
And World Press Freedom Day is being commemorated by the United Nations. Isaac Mao, is that something that resonates at all in China?
Not really in the mainstream media. They maybe put a little bit of a small block of information on this day, but not really having any, extension on the meaning, on the cases linked with that, how we discuss with that. That's why we're frustrating with those, along with the China's booming economy. We didn't see any, real development on the political and, like the professional journalism development in China. We see a lot of, information online now in China about entertainment, about, business, about making money, success stories of businessmen and the international businesses, how they play in China. But the problem is, we can see only a little bit of report on these kind of things. Yeah, but the internet users still, as I said, they are trying to collaborate with those journalists as well, to express, use internet, use new media tools, Twitter, blogs, and Web 2.0 to share the information. I mean, those journalists themselves, they use new tools to express instead of using their traditional.
Christian Mier, you said 2011 was a so-so year for press freedom. What is 2012 set to look like?
Ask me again in 2012, but I would say there are some bad trends going on, taking into account Syria, which is really a bad year after the optimism, after the Arab Spring, and so I would say it stays so-so.
Well, certainly still a lot of work needs to be done for Isaac Mao in China, for Hani Yusuf, of course, and for Christian Mier with Reporters Without Borders. I want to thank you all for sharing your insight and experience. And World Press Freedom Day, a lot still needs to be done to uphold the notion and principles of press freedom. For that, I want to thank you out there for watching. I'm looking forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.